The Edgar Cayce Guide to Self-Healing. By Patrick J. Berkery. 3. The Nature of Self. A condensed version. Cayce placed a lot of power in the concept of self. We understand that when the self rebels, it can cause disease and illness. The role of the self in the healing state is simply that of compliance with the laws of nature. All of us are sufficiently conversant with our own motivations and ideals to realize that the self-image does control and dictate our behavior, both consciously and unconsciously. Healing demands the presence of ideals, what he holds as good and worthwhile. If we are to be effective healers, we must keep our self aligned with our ideals. Study, then, to show thyself approved unto that ideal. Not merely because of what others may think, or because it is law, or because of that as may be said or thought, but because self desires to meet the problems, here, now. And these will bring harmony, these will bring understanding, if there is the determination on the part of each to give and take. It is not that either shall demand this or that of the other, but demand of self that ye measure up to that the would have you be, in the Christ. What we eat has an influence on what we think. What we think influences what we eat. Both of these influence what we do and how we behave, how we react, and even our physical appearance. Who are we? Was the experience that I have gone through necessary? Unless the entity, unless the body looks upon the experiences day by day as necessary influences and forces, and uses them as a stepping stone, soon does life become a pessimistic outlook. If each and every disappointment, each and every condition that arises, is used as a stepping stone for better things, and looking for it and expecting it, then there will still be continued the optimism. Or the looking for and expecting of. If an individual doesn't expect great things of God, he has a very poor God, hasn't he? We are our ideal of God, for we have been made in his image and likeness. What we think and what we eat, combined together, make what we are, physically and mentally. What picture of the self do you hold at this moment? How do you see yourself? How may I attune myself, that I may be one with the creative forces with Christ, that I may find this true relationship? Just as indicated. Let thy patience, thy tolerance, thy activity be of such a positive nature that it fits thee, as a glove, to be patient with thy fellow man, to minister to those that are sick, to those that are afflicted, to sit with those that are shut in, to read with those that are losing their perception, to reason with those that are weary of the turmoils, showing brotherly love, patience, persistence in the Lord, and the love that overcometh all things. These be the things one must do. And do find patience with self. It has been said, have we not piped all the day long, and no one has answered? Seekest thou, as was given from this illustration, for the gratifying of thyself? Or seekest thou to be a channel of blessing to thy fellow man? They may not have answered as thou hast seen. They may have even shown contempt, as sneering, for thy patience and thy trouble. But somewhere the sun still shines, somewhere the day is done, for those that have grown weary, for those that have given up. The Lord abhorreth the quitter. And those temptations that come in such cases, are the viewing of thine own self. Ye have hurt thyself, and ye have again crucified thy Lord, when ye become impatient, or speak harshly because someone has jeered, or because someone has sneered, or because someone has laughed at thy efforts. The self is the sum total of what a being has done about the creative and ideal forces in its different experiences on this planet. The self changes to the extent that the being acts, thinks and feels in the present about its ideals, its experiences, and its opportunities. Problems, conditions, individuals all cause a reaction in the person. The self is physical, mental and spiritual, and each one has its own separate, but interrelated attributes. The unifying principle of the three phases of the self is the mind. The mind is the builder. It is through the mind that the self comes close to either infinity or materiality. And there must be taken into consideration all phases of this entity's experience in the present, if the conditions would be wholly understood. For the mind is the builder, and if there will be kept a balance, the physical mind and the spiritual mind should cooperate, coordinate. There are those forces which the entity, then, not merely the body but the entity, body, mind, soul, is meeting in itself, called, by itself oft, karmic reactions. But karma, well, these are the conditions as we find them in this body, the mind, the soul are one within the physical forces, for the body is indeed the temple of the living God. In each entity there is that portion, which is a part of the universal force, and is that which lives on. All must coordinate and cooperate. We are a triune self. We are many things, and the healer must be able to see and experience these in himself, if he is to achieve balance and health. Sickness is an absence of coordination and cooperation within the self. At a cellular level, we are a physical body. At the same time, we are a spiritual body. Each atom of our body is charged with the energy from the first cause or spirit. The mind determines the electrical patterns which are exhibited. Everything is electrical, or vibrating. The sounds come into our body as vibrations, and are transformed by the brain into electrical patterns, and circulated through our system, and digested by each and every cell. Similarly, with whatever we may see, smell and touch. We are building a computer-like bank of memories into each and every cell. We might now call these memories the subconscious. The subconscious mind is both consciousness and thought or spirit consciousness. Hence may be best classified, in the physical sense, as a habit. And oh that all would realize, come to the consciousness that what we are, in any given experience, or time, is the combined results of what we have done about the ideals that we have set. We are divine. For, thou art in thyself divine. The mere fact or knowledge of thy existence in a material world, prompted by the activities, or the movement of the spirit itself, indicates thy own divinity, but to be attained. And this may never be done by holding grudges, or disputations with any. For these only bring hardships, as they did in that experience, to those who, not as he, attempted to take the directing of activities into their own hands. Realizing, then, who and what we are, we must treat ourselves accordingly. To thine own self in these relationships be true, and thou wilt not be false to any, to whom thou shouldest show forth in thine life, thine expression of life, thine activities in the material things, the love even of the Father. Be rather, then, in thine associations in friendships, the impersonal, yet with the love of thy fellow man so deep, so high, as to show forth that love that passeth understanding. For rest rather in those promises that he has given, in a new commandment I give, that ye love one another, and thus fulfill the law of love. Love is law is love, to those that love his appearing. Know ye that the Lord loveth rather that of love than sacrifice, rather the purposes, the aims, the desires. What is thy desire toward thy fellow man? What is that motivating thy activities? Let the love of the Father constrain thee. If we have a headache, upset stomach, or what not, do not blame, but rather accept that there is an imbalance within the total self that needs attention. The harmony and peace must be within self first, if it is to be between one another. This ye know, ye will never find harmony by finding fault with what the other does. Neither will the other find harmony without considering what the other will think or be, or care for. As reflections of the divine, we are not simply a small part of God's creation, but that thanks to our minds, we are able to take in the whole universe and make it part of our ideals. If we would heal and bring the balance of light and life to others, we must first set our own house in order. That which is so hard to be understood in the minds or the experiences of many is that the activities of a soul are for self-development, yet must be selfless in its activity for it, the soul, to develop. We cannot make the body the sole preoccupation of our ministrations. And yet the body is very important, and any extreme must be avoided in relating to this hour of self. He has promised to meet thee within the temple of thine own body. For as has been given, thy body is the temple of the living God, a tabernacle, yea, for thy soul. And in the Holy of Holies within thine own consciousness he may walk and talk with thee. Remember, all ye may know of heaven or hell is within your own self. All ye may know of God is within your own self. Cayce knew the self so well because that is what people presented to him in their search for healing. The ultimate preoccupation is with self. What will happen to me? What is happening to me? What can I expect? Our illnesses and imbalances act as bait, bringing our awareness to the level of the self. Then we begin to deal with the deep truths about ourselves that have been seeking acknowledgement in the past. Think not more highly of thyself than ye ought. Not that these are in fault, unless in so doing ye belittle others by comparing them to thine own self, and consider thyself as superior. Then ye are becoming a judge, and belittling others. For ye have not begun to think straight until ye are able to see in the life of those whom ye utterly dislike, something ye would worship in thy Maker. For each sole entity in the earth, with life, whether of this, or that shade or color, or whether this or that disfigurement of body or mind, is in the earth by the grace of God. For he has not willed that any soul should perish, and has thus prepared a way of escape. And ye, as his servant, as the child of the living God, are given the opportunity to contribute to the welfare of any whom ye even consider not quite on par with thy opportunity. We are the sum total of our experiences. We are all unique, despite our faults, failures, abilities and talents. But we must give of ourselves in order to enrich ourselves. This will be an important path to self-healing. Then, self must become selfless, and not in any form or manner desire those things that would be advantageous over others, in that others would have to suffer that self might have the advantage, for that is selfishness, and not selflessness. And selflessness is that to which each entity, each soul, must attain through the varied experiences in the material plane. When one realizes who he is and what the self is all about, and especially how the self is related to God, one's obligations to one's neighbor, and finally, one's own responsibility to the self, he cannot and will not be false to others or to his God. One especially must not put self down or belittle oneself. Humbleness is well, but who lighteth the candle and putteth it under a bushel? For, while selflessness is the law, to belittle self is a form of selfishness, and not selfless. In the study, then, open self, but surrounding self with that presence of Him, that brings healing in its wings. As the thoughts in their currents run through the energies of one seeking, and one to whom such thoughts are directed, there is builded little by little that strength which, enlivened by Him, brings all healing, the awakening, the understanding that all is well. Cayce insists quite strongly, then, on a proper concept of self, because healing is really a growth process of the self. As we discover the bodily ailments that afflict us, and successfully eradicate them through an understanding of their root cause, we find ourselves growing and maturing in a way previously undreamed of. How can I best develop the magnetic power for healing? First, understanding self, and do not become mechanical or rote in action. Rather be the growth as the spirit moves self, as the understanding comes, but much may be accomplished through these channels. The source of healing for each of us is really the self. Can I use the method of laying on of hands as one form of healing? This may be developed in self, even as the vibrations may be raised in self and in others. When there is that impelling force that arises to do, by word or by act, or by that raising in self, act in that direction and manner. The self, then, is our image of God. It is our thought of what created us, and what keeps us in being. Each individual is, in reality, inwardly, that manifestation of the individual's conception of the impelling force from within, whether it be termed or called God, nature, universal forces, natural powers, or what not. What do we as healers do with this concept of self? Are we to sit in amazement at our powers, or are we to try to con others to do our will and thereby grow in selfishness? Do not attempt to be good, but rather good for something. Know what is thy purpose, what is thy goal. And unless these are founded in constructive, spiritual construction, they will turn again upon thyself. For each soul is meeting day by day self. Hence as has been given, know thyself, in whom thou believest. Not of earthly, not of material things, but mental and spiritual, and why. And by keeping a record of self, not as a diary, but thy purposes, what you have thought, what you have desired, the good that you have done, we will find this will bring physical and mental reactions that will be in keeping with the purposes for which each soul enters a material manifestation. The stumbling block always lies in self-aggrandizement of power and ability stored in one's own self, in the misuse of self in relation one to another. For each soul seeks expression. And as it moves through the mental associations and attributes in the surrounding environs, it gives out that which becomes either for selfish reactions of the own ego, to express, or for the I am, to be at one with the great I am, that I am. The self is really an explosive concept. Misunderstood and undervalued, the self can become a power for evil. Aligned and related to the ideal of the Creator, the self becomes a force for good. For selfishness is the real sin, and as we become less and less conscious of self and more aware of being at one-ment with Him, greater may be the possibilities and blessings in the material earth, as well as in the beautiful heavenly rest. If you want to find out more about healing, you must ask the self. Only in self may the answer to healing come. Has God seen fit to give you what you want in the area of health and balance? Have you prepared yourself to be a worthy channel of His considerations? The only way you will ever get any answers to these basic questions is by asking the self. Are ye ashamed of this or that in thy experience? Why? Are ye proud of that ye can hide from someone else? Why? It isn't thy ideal, then, that ye are living up to, is it? But rather that ye may have the ideal, but ye would like to have thy cake and eat it too. But these are judgments within thine own self, and with what judgment ye judge others ye are digging the same pit for thyself. These are the mental and spiritual law pertaining to thee as well as to everyone else, and as ye will find, as has been the injunction from the beginning, be ye of one mind. The self must be recognized and trained and disciplined so that it will be able to meet the requirements of our healing goals. The requirement especially must be met, that we be willing to meet self, to deliberate with self and to correct self. Governing the self so as to prepare it for its responsibilities. In choosing then of self and self's activities, first know what is thy ideal, not merely as a theory but set it down on paper. Draw 3 lines and under each heading put, body, mind, soul. Under each of these headings write thy ideal, spiritual, mental, material. God, the Father, God, the Son, God, the Holy Ghost. Write the ideals in each under those headings also. Then find thy ideal under each. It will require time and patience and study of self, not judgment from others. Ye are not a judge of thy fellow man. You can be a banker and tell him when he can borrow and when he can't, but don't become the judge. Use mind and prayer, of constantly living that ye set or find as thy ideal. Ye will, ye can, ye may succeed. Spiritually, mentally and materially. Keep your feet on the ground, that is, be in that attitude of ever finding helpful things for others, for self, for making the world a better place, because ye have lived in it. And as ye judge, and as ye find in self, sincerity is the keynote of every individual soul. Who is sincere? 1 in a million. Ye can be one of those ones, will ye? Try it. What are my worst faults? Have I grown spiritually in this life? These should be answered from looking into self. Who is to find fault with another? Look at thine own ideal, spiritually, mentally, materially, and compare thy real thoughts, not merely in mind, but write them down. You'll not be pleased with some, but it is the best way to make corrections, facing thine own self as in a mirror. The self, then, is a fountain and the source of all the power that those who seek to be healers need to draw upon. There are so many ways given to bring about healing, but if the self is not attuned and aligned, healing cannot come. The entity may play upon the emotions of others, or it may use them for stepping stones or stumbling blocks. It may use opportunities to raise others to the point of anxiety, or to the point where they would spend their souls for the entity, using them either as buildings, or as serpents or scorpions in its emotions. It may love very deeply, either for the universal consciousness, or for gratifying only of self, or the physical emotions. Again, the entity may express each of the emotions in their counterpart, as patience, long-suffering, brotherly love, kindness, gentleness. It can also look on and hate like the Dickens. It can look on and smile, and love to the extent of being willing to give all for the cause or purpose. These are abilities latent and manifested in this entity. Use them, not abuse them. For the powers as of friends, the powers as of love, the powers as of patience, the powers as of the spirits that be, are at thy beck and call. Use them, don't abuse them. Use them to the glory of thy ideal, and let that ideal be set in that way of the cross. As has been indicated well by others, indicate in thine own life in this experience, for you've shown all phases of it in others. Let others do as they may, but as for me, I will serve the living God. And I am determined to know nothing among men save Jesus, as the Christ and him crucified. That I might know the Father. In mercy, in justice, in love then, deal thy abilities to thy associates and thy fellow man. In the next chapter, we will study the concept of being. This concept is closely related to that of the self. However, it will be more metaphysical than the concept of self. The concept of self is really the starting point for the healer. And when can you begin to improve on your self-concept? Anytime. It is never too late to mend thy ways. For life is eternal, and ye are today what ye are because of what ye have been. For ye are the co-creator with thy Maker, that ye may one day be present with all of those who love his coming.